Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Professor Andy Molnar's Magical Mystery Tour through leading and controls in project management. This week is monitoring and information systems, but I have a hard time differentiating, to be honest, between monitoring and controlling. Controlling is a large part of next week, so you'll see a lot of similarities, but that's really how important it is. So some terms to differentiate before we begin. Monitoring and controlling project work involves tracking the actual project performance with the planned project management activities, right? Your plan versus your actual, plan versus actual. That should resonate over and over in your mind as a project manager. It can mainly be looked at as a control function that takes place at all stages of the product, right? For example, from initiating all the way through closing your project. So projects are not operations. That's one of the points I want to make up front. They have things in common. They will seem like operations at times. One aspect of which is control. You're both going to control each. You're both going to have repetitive items. But the difference is that operations are going to focus on ongoing production and is really outside of the control of project management. Operations management is responsible for overseeing, directing, and controlling business operations, right? You're trying to build a deliverable and make it stable and a sustainable, repeatable, repetitive delivery so that you can get it to operations so that it can be tied to business operations. That's really the distinction. I want to make that up front. Now, the book, the author uses this slide for project authorization and expenditure control system information flow. It's okay. I don't really object. I just think it's a lot harder than it has to be and it leaves some things out. I'm not a big fan. Instead, I will tell you I am a big fan of this slide, largely because I built it. But this to me really is the monitoring and controlling process that you want to study. The other one is good too, though. Please take a look. Maybe you glean something from both of them. Notice on the top left, though, I'm going to build the plan, and I'm going to build it with the budget in mind. I had the budget from the charter at a very high level. That gives me some high-level guidance. Then I'm going to build a detailed budget in my planning process. Then I'm going to begin to build my deliverable, my project goal, right? And of course, a deliverable is any resource or product or deliverable, right, to perform a capability. And so I'm going to collect data, and we call that work performance data. And then in the moving to the right of the top of the slide, I'm going to compare my plan versus that actual data. And I use a couple of processes to do that. One is direct and manage project work. That's where I'm building my deliverable. And then I'm going to analyze that data through that process, and I'm going to end up with work performance information. That's that analyzed data of my deliverable, my plan versus my actual. And I'm going to assess it and assess this analysis in various control processes. If I'm in scope, I'll use a control scope. If I'm thinking about the schedule or the timeline, I'm going to think of it in terms of control schedule, and those are the people I invite to my meetings, right? And I'm as I assess these, I'm not assessing them just in terms of control schedule or control cost or control quality. I think about them in terms of the iron triangle, that performance measurement baseline, my scope, schedule, and cost balanced, that I spend most of my life making trade-offs to keep that triangle tight, right, as a measure of my success. So with that being the case, then, once I've done that assessment, then I can go down to the red highlight on towards the bottom of the slide, and I can do my integrated change control, that when I compare the plan versus the actual, when I determine variances or gaps, I will institute my perform integrated change control process, which is always involved with a change control system, which through that change control system, I determine a change control board, and I will keep a change control log of the records of those decisions. And those really on the bottom left impact my authorization and expenditure for control changes. I like that chart a lot better. This is another one that I like, which whenever we're talking about control, we have to consider configuration. So on the left, I have a lot about configuration identification, status accounting, configuration audit, their management plan. And so I want to maintain that. And on the right side, right, I want to maintain my change control process that I talked about, my change control log, my board, communicating with stakeholders. And so what balances configuration on the left and changes on the right is integrating all these aspects of my project management plan. The project plan itself, the scope statement, those three baselines we always talk about, scope, schedule, and cost, and any other deliverables as represented by the list below. That really is an integration of configuration and change management, important to this monitoring and information sharing of today's discussion. So we want to design the monitoring system, and all of those aspects should go into it. We do want to avoid collecting unnecessary data. I disagree with the second bullet. We don't want to collect too much data. That would be an author's note. Frankly, collect all the data you can and use a process or a system to filter it, right? Turn big data into your friend. And then design, of course, you have to have a reporting system because that's about communicating to the stakeholders. As you recall, managed communications is all about the collection, the storage, the retrieval, the sharing, presentation, and disposition of information, which is the result of your analysis, right? You have that work performance data that you turned into analysis prior to control. Now, as we're trying to control these processes, there are telltale signs that a project's in trouble. For example, muddy waters. Maybe you didn't plan in enough detail. So Churchill would say, however beautiful the strategy, you have to occasionally look at the results. For those results, whether good or bad, will tell you how you handled the details. Item 2, right? Identification of stakeholders is so important. And we have to follow that up with stakeholder interviews. We have to find out what their needs are, what their requirements are, what their interests are, what their impact is to the project, etc. We want to be aware of unconstrained constraints. Constraints are factors, as we know, that limit your team's options. They limit the schedule, the resources, cost, scope, etc., right? And with constraints, we should always think of assumptions. Things that are assumed true, but may not be true. And these are termed in assumptions. For example, the marketing team needs they may make assumptions based on sales, product, and marketing, and they could be wrong, right? So that's going to impact results. Risks, assumptions, and constraints could all cause project problems along the way, right? If assumption turns out to be incorrect, then it definitely is a risk, right? We know this. The fourth item would be really a PMI ethics point. So be honest, face issues head on. And when there are team troubles, I turn to Tuckman's team development, which is here. This is really two versions of it. In the middle of the slide, the top version discusses forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. Those are the 5 phases of Tuckman's view of how a team develops. And I just repeated that in the bottom with kind of a stair step. So it's exactly the same steps, but in addition to the summary of forming, storming, norming, and performing, I am telling you what the project manager is really doing. So in forming the team, the project manager is telling people what to do up front. And he's trying to build trust. And then the team will begin to understand their roles, and arguments will happen. So you will guide, you'll coach, you'll mentor, right? You'll do conflict management. And then the team will figure things out, and you'll highlight some fixes, some resolution. You'll start to give them some autonomy, and you'll participate. By the end, you want the team to get to high performing, where you can delegate tasks, give them space to work, and etc. That's Tuckman's team development. And it happens a lot. Sometimes you never move through the stages. Sometimes you never get out of storming. And sometimes norming just becomes where you will end up. But you work to build the team to get to a high-performing team. Now, the information needs and reporting everyone is concerned with the project should be appropriately tied to the project reporting system, right? The monitoring system ought to be constructed so it addresses every level of management. And reports need to be of the same depth and at the same frequency for each level that is required, right? So lower level personnel have a need for detailed information about their individual tasks. Where higher level might have a need for a more broader view and milestone related approaches to risk reporting or to reports, period. So in either case, the structure of the report should reflect the work breakdown structure, and each managerial level receiving reports that should allow the exercise of control to that relevant data, right? There's a tie between the reports and your ability to control the data. It's one reason we like to use balanced scorecard. It gives senior leaders a measure of impact, actionable decision items. I believe that's a Harvard product. You can Google that if you're interested. Balanced scorecard, very popular. So the relationships of project reports to the project action plan or the work breakdown structure in scope management are key to the determination of both scope content and frequency. Reports have to contain data that applies to the control of specific tasks, not data for data's sake, but what can I control? The specific tasks that are being carried out according to the specific schedule. And as I mentioned, the frequency of reporting should be great enough to allow control to be exerted during or before the period in which the task is scheduled for completion. You want to have enough notice in your control process that you can act on it and correct something in advance. In addition, the criterion that the report should be available in time to be used for that control. The timing of the reports should, as I mentioned, correspond to the milestones. And then we want to distribute to the reports to those who are interested. That's part of the stakeholder interviews and analysis piece. What are their needs? What are they interested in? My mind goes back to the stakeholder analysis we did earlier in earlier lessons where we talked about the stakeholder grid and the salience model and the cube, right? Those measures of control become very important now for distributing these reports, this content information. For senior management, right, you may use a milestone chart to deliver your reports, especially for large projects, right? Those are those critical points where major decisions have to be made. So the benefits of detail and time reporting, right? They're all listed on these slides for your use. All very true, very valuable. Okay. The report types, they can be routine reports, exceptional reports, or special analysis reports as described on this slide and in the book too. Now the types of reporting is what I really wanted to touch on. So what is a report, right? I might do a status report, which is right now how it's happening versus your project plan, your project management plan. That's the PMP that I mentioned on the slide. The progress report, what has been accomplished, what progress so far. The trend report, well, over time, are you improving or deteriorating? That's a trend report. What about a forecast report, which is going to predict the future? And we do some of this in cost management with estimate at completion or estimate to completion. You can Google those. I think we've talked about them in earlier cost management lessons. And you might do to complete performance index would be another type of forecast report. You might do a variance report, which assesses your actual, again, versus your planned baselines, which is that iron triangle, that scope, schedule, cost. We might do earned value reporting or lessons learned documentation. And we'll come back to meetings in a few minutes.